Welcome to the Gay Buddhist Forum, where teachers from all schools of Buddhism offer their perspectives on the Dharma and its application in modern times, especially for LGBTQI audiences. These talks are offered freely to the world and made possible by appreciative listeners. If you would like to support our efforts to share the Dharma with underserved audiences, please visit gaybuddhist.org. There you can donate, find a list of upcoming speakers, or enjoy many hundreds of these recorded talks dating back to 1996.
Welcome back. Let's go around and say our names. My name is Jim.
Dad. Bob.
Mark.
Conway.
Corey. Conway.
George.
Rick.
Bill.
Javier. LaSalle.
And Will.
Greg.
Lee. Snake.
Steve.
Peter. Harv. Paul.
Raphael.
David.
Clint. Jack.
Bob. Michael.
Nicholas.
Richard. Lewis.
And I'm Eugene.
Anyone here for the first time? Hey, welcome. What are your names again?
And Wade.
Wade.
Javier.
Javier.
Rick.
Rick. Welcome. We're fortunate to have as a speaker today Eugene Cash, who's making a multiple return visit. He's a well-known meditation teacher, and nationally he leads meditation retreats. He's a psychotherapist in town, and he blends aspects of Zen and Vipassana and Ridwan. Is that correct? Ridwan School.
Mm-hmm.
So welcome and thank you.
Thank you. So nice to be here. Nice to see you all. Nice to see full. Feels very full here this morning. I brought a talk, but I'm not going to give my talk. I decided I would like to do something a little more co-creative this morning. I would like you to take a moment and to reflect on what would you like me to talk about, and to really consider what would be important to you, or what would be vital or most interesting, either addressing something in your own practice or your understanding or in the teachings. And then and just sit with it a minute. Really sit with the question. Let yourself reflect in a contemplative way, which means you might think about it, but you might also just let the question come and stay very present with yourself and see what emerges to meet the question. And then after a few minutes, I'll ask you for some topics, and then we'll create a talk together based on the topics that you bring forth. Okay. What would you like to hear a talk about today?
Stated very clearly. Sort of like the question of if there is nothing to attain, and that in doing all this sort of work with spirituality, and sometimes I've heard it said that people that are doing spiritual practices trying to keep from having a spiritual experience, and sort of a contradiction or paradox of that life, that's not trusting things, but always trying to make sure that you're doing the right thing.
Mm-hmm. Good. Okay.
What have you found to be some of the most practical practices or techniques to stay present in your everyday life.
Okay.
I'd love to hear more about Ridwan.
Uh-huh. Okay.
I'd like to hear about the balance between Buddhism and psychotherapy.
Okay.
Aversion, a clear statement about what it is and some examples. I see it used many, many times, and I'm not exactly sure.
I don't want to talk about that.
He hates it.
I love aversion.
Complacency when things are going, too well.
Complacency. Okay.
Ego.
Ego. What about ego?
Ego.
Ego.
We're sitting this talk until 7 o'clock.
Intimacy without attachment.
Let's see.
I sometimes go to your other sitting, and I think the second time I was there, you commented that when you sort of paid attention to the self, there just wasn't very much there.
Mm-hmm.
And so the nature of the self.
Nature of self. Okay, I think that's enough for this morning.
You want to add on the function of the personality?
Okay. So I'll start first with the question about Buddhism and psychotherapy, which often comes up as a question. Are they the same? Are they different? Are they in contradiction to one another? Does psychotherapy just support the sense of self, and Buddhism try to somehow get rid of the sense of self? I like to look at the philosophical foundations for each, for Buddhism and psychotherapy, because I think they meet. That's where they meet, is philosophically. Both arose as a way to address suffering. The Buddha is very clear that his teaching is about suffering and the end of suffering. And psychotherapy is just a response to suffering. And the modern version, the modern tradition or lineage really, you could say, mostly begins with Freud, who was trying to address a certain kind of psychological suffering. So they both are addressing a basic human existential suffering, really. And it's not quite so much physical suffering. Buddhism and psychotherapy are not social action programs generally, although they may have parts of that. especially Buddhism. But they more address the mind of suffering, the heart of suffering, the way we suffer ontologically as human beings, or existentially might be a better way to say it. They both value, and this is true in Buddhism and in psychotherapy, I think one of the highest values is the present moment. That freedom, awakening, only happens in the present moment. Transformation only occurs in the present moment. Healing happens in the present moment. It doesn't happen in the past or future. It happens now. So much of Buddhist practice is to help or support or teach or guide us in order to learn what does it mean to be present, what does it mean to be awake, and not mean as a concept or an idea, but as a living reality. What does it mean to be here now, with your experience as it is, whatever that might be? And Buddhism provides many, many tools that support that teach us how to be present. The most basic is mindfulness of breathing, paying attention to the breathing, bringing us into contact with something very simple, somewhat neutral, but that's always happening now, as long as we're alive. And so this simple practice is to, in some sense, reorient or retrain us from being somewhat consumed by the world of our mind, our thoughts, our beliefs, our ideas, our memories, our fantasies, but to begin to orient us towards this reality that's right here, that we all can keep orienting to, even as I'm talking, as you're listening, which is what's actually happening now, in the living moment, in real time. Psychotherapy also highly values the living reality. Even if you're talking about the past, even if you're talking about what happened and the pain, the healing that happens now. If there's even some kind of cathartic experience about the past, it's happening now. And much of psychotherapy is about the relationship that happens now between therapist and client, or therapist and patient. I think there's both highly value compassion, and they use different skillful means for teaching or revealing compassion. Buddhism, it's wisdom and compassion are the two wings of the practice. In psychotherapy, they don't talk about compassion so much, but a lot of work is done on helping people to not be so harsh with themselves and with others. And we live in a culture where we're quite harsh with ourselves. And this has, I could go off on that. It has a little bit to do with ego. And the development of the ego or the sense of self in our culture, which may be the most highly developed sense of self, or maybe we could think about it another way, the most highly individuated sense of self, because we put so much emphasis on individuation in this culture. Other cultures, individuation's not so highly prized or emphasized. A more communal, collective kind of maturation is emphasized or valued. And so I believe, this is a personal belief, I believe because we have such a highly individuated culture, we also have a very high critical voice that supports that individuation. And so one of the jobs of psychotherapy, one of the hopes, is to begin to relax that harshness and that criticalness that we all seem to have, or many of us. There's another piece, I'll say just one more piece about Buddhism and psychotherapy, also related to the self, which is Buddhism has an understanding, values the question of who are you, or who aren't you. Either way, we could go at it from either side. Are we really this body? Are we really these thoughts? Are we really these feelings? Are we really, whatever it is that we're experiencing, is that who we are? And so you'll find in the text, in the traditional text, that the Buddha will do a lot of inquiry with people. He'll ask questions. He'll say, well, if you're experiencing this, then is this true? Or if you're experiencing that, is this true? And how do you understand your sense of self if this is true? There's one metaphor he uses at some point. He says bhikkhus, followers, practitioners, you see the grasses, leaves, and twigs in the meadow, and if those twigs and grasses and leaves are to be gathered up and set on fire, would you think, oh, this is me who's being set on fire? That, oh, this is horrible, I'm being set on fire. And what do they say? No, that's not me. And then he says, even so, notice that form is not you. Form, I'm forgetting the paradigm I want, which is the five aggregates, what he calls the five aggregates of what makes up a human being. Form is not you. Actually, the way he says it is, form is not self. Form is not self. Feelings are not self. Formations are not self. Perceptions are not self. Formations, which is really mind, reactions, thought, is not self. Consciousness is not self. Just so, if you understand this, then it will be of your great benefit and great fruit. And so he's always teaching like that about the sense of self, that who and what we take ourselves to be, and mostly he doesn't say there's no self. Buddha does not ever actually say that. When he's asked directly, he won't answer the question. And when the questioner leaves, his attendant says, well, why didn't you answer him? He said it would be too confusing. But more, he does this other thing of saying, pay attention to what is not self. Now, psychotherapy doesn't posit that there's no self. But psychotherapy, and as far as I can tell, all the psychotherapeutic modalities talk about how the sense of self is constructed. And how it's constructed. Mostly it's talked about in terms of mental images, introjects from the outer world, self and object relationship, self and other relationship and the affect between it. And all of this happens at a very young age, that this sense of self is constructed. And one of the ways that psychotherapy works with that is sees that construction often is kind of rigidified. And so psychotherapy often works with relaxing our sense of self. So there's what we might consider a more fluid sense of self. We're able to be an adult and responsible at work. We're able to be aggressive at times when we need to be. We are able to be empathic at times when we need to be. We're able to be childlike at times as part of what might be called the healthy sense of self. But if you start to take a little bit of an overview of that picture, what you see is a fluid sense of self, that we're not any one self, and that psychotherapy values that capacity to be fluid and resilient as a sense of self. So 2 things about psychotherapy. It posits that the sense of self is a development. It's not, and there's some debate here, but it's not there at the beginning in the sense that we know it. And that the unhealthy sense of self is rigid and tight. And a healthier sense of self is more fluid, resilient, malleable even, and changes with the the world that we deal with and the life that we deal with. And so I think that's one of the places they meet, is in that malleability or flexibility or fluidity of sense of self. I have never met anybody who doesn't have a self. I have never met anybody who doesn't have a self. I have met people who are not attached to the sense of self. And this is, we can debate this point. Some teachers may not agree with what I'm saying, so don't take it as absolute truth. You're getting kind of my Eugene's version. But the sense of self, it's like a body. We've got a body. You don't get rid of the body because you're not the body. There's still a body here. There's a sense of self. If we hold to it tightly, rigidly, we'll suffer. The more we can relax, the more we can let the sense of self be here and see that maybe we don't have to be constrained by that conditioning, which both Buddhism and psychotherapy agree together, that it's a condition, the sense of self is conditioned. It may not be who we are in essence. Both psychotherapy and Buddhism value the capacity to live our life fully. And so a lot of therapy is about that, about areas of one's life where maybe it's difficult, whether it's relationship or work, or for many of us these days, play is a difficult area, or whatever it might be, communications, etc. Buddhism doesn't talk about it quite like that, but puts this tremendous value on the present moment and the capacity to be present and be fully here and trust very deeply that that capacity is good. That is good. We will find what is good in us by our capacity to be present and to see all of what's here, not just the good. See the what are called traditionally the defilements, or the kilesas is the Pali word. But we could say the obscurations, the conditioning. And so there are many practices that support being present. Mindfulness is all a practice about being present, about waking up, about being here now. The question that was asked was specifically about practical practices to stay present. Actually, there's a zillion practical practices. What's hard is remembering to do them. And so one of the translations of sati, which is mostly translated as mindfulness, another way that it's translated is to remember or recollect. And I like that because it reminds me to remember when I think of it that way, that my practice is to remember, not remember the past, but to remember now. And so it's not remembering now as a thought process, but it's remembering in the more somatic or kinesthetic flavor of remembering, as if we had lost a member, a part of ourselves, and we are remembered, we become whole. And so this is mindfulness as becoming whole, becoming fully here in the present moment with whatever's here. And so I like very much this idea of recollect or remember, and mindfulness as a sense of wholeness with this experience, not being divided, not being separate, not being somewhere else. And that said, of course, the beautiful paradox and the exquisite trickery, I don't know the right word, of mindfulness practice is when we are split, then we can be fully with being split even. Or when we're lost, or, absorbed in some fantasy, we can begin to become fully present with that. So that there's always higher ground. There's not some place you're supposed to be, but the emphasis is on, can you be here with whatever here is bringing forth, with whatever life is bringing forth now. And we trust that capacity can both build and grow, and that it's good. That there's a goodness to your presence. And that presence can lead to awakening, freedom, liberation. And so, I could name a lot of practical practices. I'll name a few just to throw some in. I practice before I get out of bed in the morning. It's the first thing I do when I wake up is I do a little body scan. And that's a traditional Vipassana practice of just moving the consciousness, moving the awareness through various parts of the body. And so I'll start with my feet and move through my whole body. Maybe I'll go back down again. And then when that's done, I'll feel the whole body. I'll sense the whole body very deeply. And then I'll open my eyes and stay sensing the body. And really, as a way to be embodied, which is also highly valued in Vipassana practice. And more as we practice, what I've seen, the cultural valence, at least in the insight meditation community, is a tremendous emphasis on embodiment now. And so you can notice, how are you experiencing your body right now as you're listening? And I like to encourage people to put more emphasis on their body than on the listening. And you'll notice, if you really start to feel, sense, directly know your body, even with whatever happens, feel your body, even with the beads breaking, it's okay. and notice what happens in your body when the beads break. Notice if you stop breathing. And what I like is that if you really start to sense your body very deeply, you'll notice you don't have any problem hearing me and understanding me. And so it points to a level of functioning that's possible from a contemplative practice. That you don't have to go away from your practice to function. You may need to practice functioning as you practice. That's true. But I'm going off a little bit on the side here. So that's the first thing that I do personally. I also pay attention to what practices draw me, because they change over the life and time of practice. So right now, personally, I'm very into Hara practice. Hara is a center, a couple fingers below the belly button and a couple fingers in. Used mostly in Zen practice and in martial arts practice, although some Vipassana teachers in Burma teach it. It's the same center that's used in Taoism, the Dantian, and all the Chinese practices. It's used in Sufi practice, it's called the Kaf. So right now I'm drawn to that. So I do a lot of Hara practice as I move through my day. I just see, what's happening here? What does this feel like here? Or right now, while I'm talking to you, part of my attention will be, I'm trying to keep right here and see what that's like. You can take any piece of the Dharma and make it a practice. Take the Eightfold Path, right? You could do right speech, make it a practice for a week, for a month, for a year, for your whole life. And that can take you very deep. At first it seems like kind of an idea practice and superficial. Change your whole life to do right speech practice. Or you could take one of the Four Noble Truths and just study it as a practice. And it will support your being present. any of these kind of practices. So you can just take suffering, for example, and just start to study suffering. And then as you study, as you open to it, then you want to combine it with what's it like to be present as you're seeing suffering in yourself, in your partners, in your family, in your community, at work, on the street, wherever it might be. And then at some point maybe you want to take freedom from suffering as a practice and beginning to recognize freedom. Really, and so for me, and what I like to really encourage is to follow your heart in practice. See where you're drawn. See what draws you, because that's where you'll find your power. And power is not talked about enough in practice. This is my opinion lately. That there's a certain kind of power as you really begin to align with the Dharma. And part of that alignment is seeing what's true for you. Where are you drawn? Some people are drawn to compassion. Some people are drawn maybe to the arts. Some people are drawn to speech. Some people are drawn to activism. Some people are drawn to more sitting, more solitary practice. To me, it doesn't matter where you're drawn. What matters is that you begin to follow that and trust it and let it deepen and let that deepening transform you. Now, what does that all mean given that there's nothing to attain? Right? One of my favorite Buddhist books is Being Nobody, Going Nowhere. And so there's a whole flavor of teachings that comes through which says, don't do anything. And it's a great teaching. Those are good teachings. Don't do anything. If you can. Most of us can't not do anything. It's actually really a very difficult practice not to do anything. Just to be, right? For many of us, if we just be, we just end up lost in our thoughts. That the mind, there's so much momentum of our training to be in our minds, that's what happens. And so this question of, well, why work if there's nothing to get to, if there's no one to be, if there's nothing to do, that the Dharma is radiant, luminous, and sits right in your seat already. That it's a very interesting paradox, because on one hand it's totally true that you are what you seek. That's like the good news. You are what you seek. But if you forget that you are what you seek, it can really help to do practice. And most of us actually either forget or we don't actually know that we are what we seek. And so it's important to have some taste of it, to have a glimmer, to have some grace of actually seeing very clearly who and what we are. And what I've seen is that grace doesn't just stay. It's not like, even if you do, 3 months of meditation and boom, you see there's no self and da-da-da. And you just see that everything is empty and it's, and that there's only love, and it's great. That's great when that happens. I haven't seen it stay for people much. It comes and it impacts, it'll change your whole life. Even a small glimpse will change your life. Even the glimpses you've had. If you come here regularly, you've had something, some teeny taste of freedom, some understanding that you're not just your ideas or your beliefs or your suffering, that there's something more. And so even a teeny taste will change your whole life. It's beautiful, the Dharma, that way. So this is one way we could talk about this paradox. There's another way we can talk about this paradox. It's very interesting. So the Buddha did his practice, didn't know who he was, worked very hard, 6 years, did all kinds of practices, finally was enlightened. Totally, completely free. Like, done deal, right? So after the Buddha's totally and completely liberated, he still practices. There's lots of times in the scriptures he says, okay, that's enough, I'm going to go do walking meditation now. Or I'm going to go do sitting meditation now. What do you make of that if there's nothing to attain? Why would the Buddha sit? Why would he practice? And he didn't have anything to attain at that point. I hear that metaphorically, and I think that's very interesting. Or archetypally, that he was totally free, and yet there's something good in practicing. There's something good. And the goodness is that I'm not so clear on this point, but it's more an intuition, really, that I have. That the Buddha continued to practice because it was good to practice. And I find it good. I mean, there's times when you can feel very free, and it's like, why bother? No. But then why not? It's lovely. It's lovely just to sit, just to be. Now, it may be a different flavor of practice at that point. Maybe the practice is, maybe it's a practice of not doing. So you just sit down. And that's lovely. Personally, I'll speak personally, what I like to do is I like to see what's happening. Is there some, actually, let me think, what do I really, all I like to do is go sit these days. I go sit, I follow what interests me, so lately it's been the hara. I went through about 2 years of just sitting but not doing anything, and that was great. But right now I feel drawn to this other, to actually doing something and feel the value of it. I think you have to just trust your own self, your own practice, and see for yourself. My personal skepticism about nothing to attain is that it's so easy to say that, and people suffer so much, even after they know there's nothing to attain. And so it may be a different value system. The Buddhist value system is very much about suffering and freedom from suffering. The teachings that I know that most emphasize nothing to attain is the Advaita Vedanta teachings. And I think that's great if that works for you. It actually never worked for me. If it works, do it. But I haven't seen it work for most people. I know a lot of people practice with Advaita teachers. And it's great, especially if you're around the teacher, then it works really good, especially if it's somebody very high like Punjaji. But I haven't seen it so much. And it's an ongoing, that's it, they're done. I see people act like that at times, but I'm a little skeptical. I have to. That's my honest opinion. So that's the best I can say about that. It's true. There's nothing to do, and sometimes it takes a long time to really get that. Really get it very deeply. This is great. I numbered these. I have 1, 2, 3, but I don't have 4. Oh, there it is. There's 4. And what's our time frame?
Typically we aim for noon as a conclusion, and we need a couple moments for
okay.
some announcements.
So, yeah, I'm not going to get to everything. So I'll go to intimacy without attachment. I think an important place to investigate around this intimacy without attachment is to notice what it's like first is to develop a very deep intimacy with ourselves, with our direct experience. And because I think then we can begin to see that what's here is transient, transparent, fluid, empty, and that there's a kind of intimacy that with practice that it's so exquisite. There's an intimacy with ourselves, first of all, with our actual experience. And I think that can be a very powerful basis for intimacy with others without attachment. That when we really start to know what's here in its most universal or fundamental formation, presentation, we know that we can't hold on to it. We can't hold on to our feelings or our thoughts or our bodies or anything. And that can be the basis for a very profound intimacy with others, knowing that we can't hold on to them. And then we can start to really discriminate the difference between love and attachment. And love and attachment are different. Love is love, and attachment is attachment. For me personally, I think the strongest teaching around that's been with my daughter. And I have a 20-year-old daughter now, and watching her grow up and being parenting her and being in relationship like that, and not being able to hold on any step of the way, because you know what kids do. If you hold on, they'll just scream at a certain point or push away. And so now having her totally flew the coop. You know, she's gone. She's launched. And yet this tremendous love that I feel for her. But she's totally gone now. I have almost no control, a little bit of financial control, teeny bit, but even that, not much. So, and then the other thing I want to say about it is that it's a practice to be intimate and to keep letting go. And so it means to be willing and able to uncritically sit with the feelings of holding, of attachment, of grasping, and the pain that generally comes around that. I mean, I use my daughter as an example because it's the longest relationship I've had. Because other relationships I found that I could leave, even in my marriage. But partly, and what I see in retrospect was there wasn't the capacity to stay with what was difficult. And the capacity which develops with practice to be with suffering allows for intimacy without attachment. So I'll stop there. I'm sorry I couldn't get to a couple of the questions. They were all good. Thank you for your attention.
Greg, I don't see your voice.
I just wanted to remind everybody about the Dana Bowl, and if people are able to, we suggest a $5 donation. If you can give more, it would be much appreciated, and please bear that in mind. Thank you, and welcome to those who joined us for the first time today.
What the big hot water urn is broken, so we just have a teapot for tea, and we ask that you wash your cups after. If you have any tea, there's probably some treats out there. You guys, for the first time, if you have any questions, approach. Greg or I would be happy to Greg or me, we'd be happy to speak with you. Eugene, thank you very much. Very provocative. Really
Good.
Very helpful. Thank you. Anyone else? Paul?
Yeah, there's a steering committee meeting here next week after our regular meeting, and anyone's welcome to attend the steering committee meeting, especially the steering committee members. There's an all fellowship meeting on the last Sunday in March that we need to plan at the steering committee meeting next week, and so far that's the only agenda item that I know. But I'll send an email out if anyone has any other agenda items. I'll be happy to facilitate the meeting.
I have a couple announcements. I am part of the Insight Meditation community of San Francisco. We meet every Sunday night from 7 to 9 at the Unitarian Church. You're all invited to come join us. We have a 45-minute sitting and then a talk and discussion. We also have a sister Sangha in South Africa that we're very involved with. And we've been supporting their work with the HIV/AIDS epidemic in South Africa. And they've been doing some amazing work. It's a wonderful Sangha there. We're having a big fundraiser for them March 29th. You're all invited. I left some flyers out. If you want more details, you can get it at our website, sfinsight.org. sfinsight.org. Also, I want to mention another sitting group that just found a really nice home. My friend and colleague Noah Levine, who is Stephen Levine's son, he teaches, he's a group now on Thursday nights at 7:30 at the Cultural Integration Fellowship on 3rd Avenue and Fulton. And it's a really neat group. And Noah's got a book coming out pretty soon called Dharma Punk. And I've been reading the book. It's very provocative, very interesting about his life, his struggles, his struggles with drugs, alcohol, crime, and then his transformation through practice. It's really beautiful.
So this practice is a Buddhist practice?
He's in the Insight Meditation community, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. He's being trained with Jack Kornfield now. So.
I just want to echo again these wonderful talks and just this entire Sangha. The world being what it is depends upon money, which depends upon your donations. So please think about that and be generous.
George, a reminder that talks are available on the internet at the GBF website, gaybuddhist.org. Also, we've just migrated over to a larger server, so now over 20 talks are available online.
Great.
Well, let's get in a circle and hold hands for the closing. Can you give us a closing?
May our practice here this morning, our sincerity, our goodness, our love of the Dharma, may it be for our benefit, for each other, and may it be for all beings, all human beings, the human beings who suffer from hunger or war or illness or fear, racism, division. May all beings be happy and peaceful. May all beings, human, non-human beings, all beings in all directions, in all worlds, be free from suffering. May all beings awaken, realizing wisdom and compassion. Ding.
Thank you for listening to the Gay Buddhist Forum. If you would like to hear several new talks per month and be notified of upcoming speakers so you can participate live, please subscribe to this podcast, like us on Facebook, and join our mailing list by visiting gaybuddhist.org.